Let's speak to Richard Burr then, former Republican senator for North Carolina. Welcome to Times Radio. Thanks for being with us in person.
Great to be with you.
Great to see you. As a Republican senator, you voted to impeach Donald Trump for inciting the Jan 6 insurrection. Many viewed that as a brave move. Why then support him in this election?
It's very simple. It's like a court of law. When somebody is indicted for something, if they're found not guilty, they still have the freedoms of life. The only thing that could disqualify Donald Trump is if he had been impeached. It was my colleagues that chose not to do that. Therefore, he can run again. And like every American now, I have a choice between two candidates. And given that neither one is disqualified, I chose the one that I thought could best lead the country the next 4 years.
So even though you voted to impeach him, you still feel, or, I mean, perhaps your view of him has changed in the years since 2021.
Well, I'm not sure that any Americans' views have changed since 2021. We disagree with how the president says certain things, but we also remember the prosperity that we experienced for 4 years under his leadership. We understand the stability it brought to the world. There weren't the types of conflicts that we've got today. And I think every American realizes that their choice is between Vice President Harris and former President Trump. And from all the indications right now, America's split about 50-50, but we'll find out tomorrow whether, in fact, polling is right or wrong. It has not necessarily been accurate the last two election cycles.
So would it be fair to say that he wouldn't have been your first choice candidate for president for the Republicans?
I campaigned aggressively for Tim Scott, who was a colleague of mine in the United States Senate, because I felt that Tim was a fresh new generation. But at the end of the day, primaries determined that Donald Trump would be the Republican nominee. Unfortunately, it wasn't the electorate that chose Kamala Harris. It was the decision by the president to withdraw. And she will be historic from a standpoint of the first candidate to run for president that was not elected in a primary process.
So actually, in terms of the democratic process, democracy, Trump is perhaps the stronger, more valid.
He certainly has a proven
candidate.
Base of support. And what we're going to have to find out is what is the base of support for Vice President Harris. The one thing about the American system versus most in the rest of the world is ours has the certainty that for 4 years, that person who's elected tomorrow will serve for 4 years. And short of impeachment or assassination, we will elect another president 4 years from now.
You weren't the only Republican senator to vote to impeach Donald Trump. But for those that didn't make that choice, I wonder whether you came under a bit of pressure from them, but how did that affect your standing at all in the party?
Well, I don't think so. I continued to serve out the rest of my term, and I think did it effectively. I look back on it as the right thing to have done at that particular time. Just like I look at today, the right thing to do is to support the former president.
You're here in the UK. I wonder whether it feels strange to be here with everything reaching fever pitch over in the United States at the moment.
Oh, no, I found at dinner last night the tables that surrounded me of Brits were very interested in carrying on a conversation about the U.S. elections. They were knowledgeable of it. They were interested in it. And in most cases, they believed that Trump would win, which was a surprise to me.
I think many people might ask if you are backing Donald Trump and it is a knife-edge election. You know, arguably each candidate needs all the support, all the muscle that they can get. Why you wouldn't be over in the United States right now? Why would you be here in the UK?
Because I have a day job now, and the day job led me to the UK to speak partially on the elections, but to talk about the geopolitical landscape that's existed. Excuse me. The United States is not the only country that's had an election this year. You've had over 20 parliamentary elections in Europe
this year, elections,
as well as the European Union, which not only had an election for the entire body, but you increased the number of individuals in the European Union. About a month ago, Japan placed in office a new prime minister that 2 weeks prior to that, nobody knew anything about. So people look and say the United States election this year is historic. We've had historic elections for this entire calendar year from one end of the globe to the next. So I'm not sure that the United States is unique. I think we're all experiencing the change in leadership and what that change brings.
Are you quite glad to be away from the intensity of polling day in the United States? Are you quite glad to be here at the moment, I wonder?
Oh, I'm delighted to be out of the line of fire, let's say, as a political figure, one that's focused only as an observer. But I also am not retired because I believe that the next 10 to 20 years are going to be the most exciting years to be alive in the global economy that I've ever seen. And that's why the leadership that you choose in the UK.
So what makes you say that? Why are you so excited about the next 2 decades and the global economy?
Technology is going to drive the future in a way that we dreamed about as kids, where technology will transform and disrupt everything that we know in life. AI is going to present cures to healthcare diseases. It's going to provide answers to questions that we've had for decades that we couldn't get an answer to. It's going to provide the next generation with a pathway to unlimited job opportunities and unlimited success. And the question is, are we going to sit on the sidelines and be an observer, or are we going to be on the field and be a participant? There was no way I could let that happen.
Okay.
So that's why the leadership that you elect in the UK, that we elect in the United States, that's elected all around the world, is absolutely crucial, because leadership is going to be the determining factor as to who really does experience the participation of that very transformative economy.
Yeah, well, it's transformative, but we also need to be really careful about safeguards, don't we? And security. AI is wonderful. It could advance so many areas, so many different parts of our lives, but it could also disrupt. It could derail democracy. It could send leaderships into a spin. And so just as we need to be excited, we also need to be incredibly careful that there are enough guardrails in place across the world for evolution, for how and what technology is doing.
You know, we had the same conversation when I first went into politics in 1995 about a thing called the internet, and we were all concerned with what the internet would grow into. I didn't know then, so I voted to leave the regulatory side very minor, not to tax the internet, to let it grow, let the technology grow. Today, I still have no idea where this ends up. I just know it has transformed every person's life on the globe, not just the United States or the UK, but everybody. And we've got an opportunity to see the same type of thing happen with AI. I agree with you that we need guardrails, but the guardrails need to be guardrails that don't in any way deter that technology from maturing. It means that we've got to be stewards of the data that's used to train those AI models, but not limited from a standpoint of what potentially we could discover with that.
Okay. If Donald Trump is elected, does he need guardrails too? Are there enough guardrails in place to make sure that he doesn't, enact some of what we hear he might be interested in doing? Project 2025 is not officially affiliated with the Trump campaign at all. It is a separate document. It is a blueprint for leadership. But there are some ideas in that document that we understand Donald Trump is keen on, such as making the civil servants more partisan, ripping into the DOJ, obliterating some of those 3-letter organizations.
Sure.
Are you confident that there are enough guardrails in place should Donald Trump want to push things a little bit further, perhaps, in his second term as president, if that's the case?
Here again, I think we're unique in our government structure, that we have a United States House and a United States Senate. They share
But both could be under Republican control within a week or so.
They could, and I think it's unlikely today that all three will. But even if they could, Congress shares a third of the power with the president and a third of the power with the Supreme Court. And you can't find one incident in history where, even when parties controlled all three bodies, that the Congress didn't exercise their unique jurisdiction over appropriations, what we spend, how we spend it, what we tax. The United States Senate has great latitude in foreign policy. Clearly, it's the Congress that declares war. The president can address a conflict, but if it turns into a war, it's got to be signed off by Congress. So we have built-in measures that we would consider to be checks and balances. At the end of the day, though, it's about the individuals that are elected in those positions and whether they display also the leadership skills to make sure that if the president nominates a partisan for a secretarial position, it's the United States Senate that may not confirm that president's choice.
Okay.
And it certainly happened more recently in both Republicans and Democrat administrations.
You were a senator in North Carolina. It's a swing state. It's a genuinely close call in that particular state. I wonder what you think will determine things in North Carolina.
Well, I think we've already begun to see it. We had 16 days of early voting, and North Carolinians voted at a historic pace. 56.8% of the eligible voters in North Carolina actually voted before Election Day. And if you looked at it and actually purged the voter files for people who have moved, it would actually be closer to 65%. So in a country like the United States, where it's historic to get about 72% turnout in an election year, there are not too many people left to vote today, Tuesday in the United States. So it may be that early voting might be a bigger indicator as to how the elections are going to turn out, at least in those states where early voting has been a very heavily used tool this year.
Yeah, so Trump carried North Carolina in 2020, but did so by just over 70,000 votes. It is a purple state, could vote red, could vote blue, winnable by either side this year. Look.
Yeah, I'd also remind you, North Carolina is represented by 2 Republican senators. I won 3 different elections for 18 years as a Republican in North Carolina. So those of us that are elected don't see the purple color that some seem to look at. It's just North Carolinians really do choose individuals.
What happens if Donald Trump narrowly loses this election? In backing him this time, you've got to be pretty confident you're not going to see a repeat of January the 6th. But I wonder if your mind has wandered to the point or to consider what might happen if Donald Trump loses narrowly.
We will have a peaceful transition of power.
You're confident about that?
I'm confident of it. Donald Trump.
Why? Why are you confident about it?
Because we have a system that embraces that. And though it was tested before, it was only delayed 6 hours before that transition happened. And now that doesn't in any way suggest that Donald Trump as an individual might not claim that there were fraudulent votes or that something was wrong. But we also have a system that checks for that. And it won't delay in any way, shape, or form whether a new president is sworn in January.
Do you think he's going to accept that, though? That was the issue in 2020. He actually still hasn't conceded.
He still hasn't conceded.
The 2020 election. So what makes you think he'll do it this time?
I didn't say he would concede. I said that the election would be certified by the United States Congress, and on the swearing-in day, a new person would replace him in the White House. I'm not sure that he would agree that that The Apprentice as a program is necessarily taken off of TV. That's where he cut his teeth in entertainment, and I think we forget sometimes that he's an entertainer as much as he is anything.
Do you think he's more? I just wonder whether he has more power and more influence this time to disrupt things further. Should he not be happy with the outcome of the election? He's got a stronger following now. January the 6th is strongly seen by his supporters as a peaceful day, a peaceful event, which we know isn't true, but that is what many Donald Trump supporters, that is what many people who protested, who were part of huge violence in the Capitol on that day, that is how they now see it all these years later. I just wonder whether there is a concern that Donald Trump has the ability to rile more people, to engage crowds, to engage angry people who support him to a greater extent this time.
Listen, I think both our countries share one thing in common, and that's a rule of law that we follow. And that applies to elections as well. But we also share with colorful individuals like Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. They're unique. They present themselves very different from traditional politicians. And the
He's also a convicted criminal, Donald Trump. I don't know whether Boris Johnson would be too happy with you comparing them like for like, maybe in character. But we do have a convicted criminal here standing for election.
Well, you know, in the legal system, you have an opportunity to appeal. And I think under appeal, everybody believes that conviction will be lifted. So I give the president the benefit of the doubt of letting him go through the legal process like we would any individual. But the truth is that both were flamboyant and outspoken, and that doesn't disqualify. Maybe it tells us we ought to get used to people different than the mold we grew up in actually running for public office.
You just had a clip there of Donald Trump from his final rally last night in Pennsylvania, and you'll note some of the language. And just, you know, from being a former senator, from being an elderly statesman of the Republican Party, someone hugely experienced and respected in office as you were for, you know, decades, for several years. I wonder what you make of Donald Trump's language. Is that just part of the fun, or is that a concern?
Well, Donald Trump says a lot of things that most Americans, most Brits would not say. But he is an entertainer, and he sees rallies as a way to energize a person who is there to hear him and to be inspired by him. And politics, unfortunately, isn't limited to just the United States from a standpoint of the negativism of elections. And I think what we hopefully see is we see the pinnacle of that, and hopefully it's downhill from here. And it really does change to where it's more of a civil discourse going forward.
So once the campaign's over, if Donald Trump assumes office, you would hope with that becomes perhaps slightly more measured language.
Well, I certainly don't think we'll see another candidate that replicates his campaign style. But I don't think we're ever going to see the negativism taken out of politics. And as one who ran numerous times, I can only tell you that pointing out somebody else's faults is only used because it works.
Finally, you were an advisor to Donald Trump in his 2016 campaign. I wonder whether you were approached to help out this time, whether you could see yourself back in the Republican Party to the extent where you might hold office again, you might be part of Donald Trump's administration. Does any of that appeal to you?
It does not. I'm enjoying the private sector, and my wife deserved me to retire from the political scene. Nor do I believe with my impeachment vote the president would be too anxious to have me come back into the fold. But here again, I think that it's a totally different situation when I've got a choice to make between two individuals, but I exercise who can best take care of the future for my children and grandchildren.
Finally, Richard, one more question for you, because I don't think you've told me quite yet. Who do you think is going to win this election?
And listen, I think if early voting is any indication, Donald Trump is likely going to win the election in the United States. But at the end of the day, we can never forget that it's America's voters that are going to determine the outcome. And state by state, that's affected by the Electoral College. So there are really 6 states in the United States, maybe 7, that will ultimately decide who the next president is. And America is used to close elections, so they'll handle this one just fine.
And which swing states do you think Donald Trump will take?
I think former President Trump takes North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona for sure, possibly Nevada. And then really this comes down to Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
It's tight all the way, isn't it? Listen, thank you so much for joining us. Richard Burr, former Republican Senator for North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you.